Hey, welcome back to Magnet Sociology, Chapter 14, Education and Religion. We'll start out talking about a case study, Religion in Public Schools. Section 1, we'll go into talk about the Sociology of Education. Section 2, the issues in American education. Section 3, the Sociology of Religion. In Section 4, Religion in American Society. And then we'll talk about a lab where we can apply what we discuss in the chapter. So, parents have a primary responsibility of caring for their children. They often share religious worship with their children, but by common belief, failing to educate a child to fully participate in society constitutes harm, so the government requires children to attend school. What happens when the government attempts to teach lessons that the parents or students object to on religious grounds? The First Amendment clearly states the government will not create a state religion, but court judges are in charge of the interpretation in specific cases. Court cases have resulted in the banning of voluntary prayer times. Some key Supreme Court decisions on prayer in public schools is Engel versus Vitale. In 1962, the Supreme Court ruled that a public school may not conduct a voluntary non-denominational prayer. The school district of Abington Township versus Shemp in 1963, the Supreme Court ruled a public school may not conduct public Bible readings even if student participation is optional. In Wallace versus Joffrey in 1985, a public school may not conduct a silent meditation or voluntary prayer. And then as 1992, Lee versus Weissman, a public school may not conduct a prayer at a graduation ceremony even if attendance is voluntary. Santa Fe Independent School District versus Doe. In 2000, the Supreme Court ruled a public school may not permit individual students to conduct public prayers at extracurricular events. Here in this picture, we see an entire classroom prays together at Boys Town. This is a private organization that cares for and educates at-risk youth. Section 1, the Sociology of Education. Education consists of the norms and roles involved in transmitting knowledge, values, and patterns of behavior from one generation to the next. Sociologists have gained insight into education by studying it from a functionalist, conflict, and interactionist perspectives. Our main idea is that sociologists use different analytical perspectives to understand the nature and functions of education. So by the end of this section, you should be able to answer the following questions. How does society define education? What is the functionalist perspective on education? And how do sociologists view education through the conflict perspective? How do interactionist sociologists look at education? A society's future largely depends on successful socialization of the new members. To accomplish this goal, every society has developed a system of education consisting of roles and norms that ensure the transmission of knowledge, values, and patterns of behavior from one generation to the next. In some pre-industrial societies, education is largely informal and occurs mainly within the family. Schooling is formal education, which involves instruction by specially trained teachers who follow officially recognized policies, like me. The functionalist view of education studies the ways in which education aids our society. So they try to determine what that function is for the society that makes education beneficial. The conflict view of education studies the ways in which education maintains the imbalance of power in society. How does education make it for some people to be superior to others? The interactionist view of education, however, studies the face-to-face interaction of the classroom. So the interactionist is actually studying what's going on in the school. Find the main idea. So what is the purpose of education? It's to transmit knowledge, skills, behavior patterns, and values necessary for people to become the functioning members of our society. Now, the functionalist perspective on education: children must learn the knowledge and skills they will need as adults. Education generates a new knowledge which is useful and adapting to changing conditions. So this is the function of education, to make sure people have these skills. It's to transmit the culture of the society. For societies to survive, they must pass on its core values of their culture. Societies use education to support their communities' social and political systems. If the society fails to transmit this culture, the society will eventually crumble. Social integration. Education serves to produce a society of individuals who share common national identity. Schools foster social integration and national unity by teaching a core set of skills and values. So what they're doing here is the education is giving us all this common sense of how to act and behave and to recognize ourselves as Americans. And the school is teaching you the various skills that it'll take for you to fit in well into society. And that's one of the things, that if you're not learning those skills well, you're not going to fit into society well. Occupational placement. Education screens and selects the members of society for the work they will do as adults. And schools in industrialized countries identify students who show talents and abilities at an early age. So what schools do here is they try to give you the skills that you'll need to be a productive worker. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're trained to do a specific skill, but they give you the tools to be able to learn those specific skills. And those students that have special talents are hopefully identified and given the opportunity to specialize in a particular area, like in mathematics or in English or the other skills that you might have. What facts about schools seem to be explained by the functionalist perspective? Education screens and selects new members of society for the work they will do as adults and making them productive citizens. So what you can do now is we observe the American values in the classroom. A classroom is a place of learning values as well as skills and knowledge. What values does your classroom teach? So what I want you to do here is review the text in this section on transmission of culture and social integration. Observe all the items, posters, quotation, lists, art on the walls of your classroom. What values do they express? Besides the U.S. flag, what other objects are in your classroom to promote patriotism? And write down those answers. Think about how the school day is scheduled, how you spend your time. What values does this reflect? And write down the answer. And then we'll analyze your results. In what ways does your classroom contribute to social integration? In what ways does your classroom transmit American culture and support American values? How much of your classroom space is devoted to the material that promotes some American values? Now, let's talk about education from the conflict perspective. Remember, the conflict perspective is that it sees it sees conflict as the thing that is the driving energy that makes us move the society forward. Education serves to sort students into social ranks and to limit the potential of certain individuals and groups to gain power and social rewards. Students' achievement or failure tends to reflect existing inequalities. So in the educational environment, students will be categorized by their abilities, and this allows some to get ahead and who will get more rewards, and others will be channeled into a lower class of workers. And these often reflect prejudices and discriminatory practices that exist in society as a whole. Social control. Schools produce unquestioning citizens who accept the basic inequalities of the social system. Basically, the schools have all kinds of rules that we try to enforce, and sometimes these rules help us keep people in their place. The hidden curriculum often exists within schools, where the transmission of cultural goals are that are not openly acknowledged. For instance, like taking your hat off indoors and things like that. No sagging pants. Tracking. Tracking is a practice that isn't officially used anymore, at least not in most schools, but it does still continue. Tracking involves the assignment of students to different types of educational programs. They used to have programs in which you would be placed either in an academic track or a trade track. And in those cases, what they found was that oftentimes minority students would be placed into the lower level tracks and never be given the opportunity to go into college and things like that. Classroom instruction is used in the different tracks to serve to reproduce the status quo. Oftentimes, however, now that it's not officially tracking, however, we've changed it to levels where we have the standard, honors, AP, IB, all those different routes are taken. And if you examine the students that take those classes, you'll find that they are oftentimes culturally going to do that same sort of thing. Education and socioeconomic status. Opportunities for educational success are distributed unequally. Higher status college students outnumber lower status college students. So basically what this is saying is that our education level is oftentimes based on our economic status. Statistically speaking, conflict theorists argue that the opportunity for educational success is distributed unequally across society. To illustrate this conflict, theorists point out that the minority students are more likely to drop out of high school than are white students, and they are less likely to graduate and go on to college. So how do the data on achievement for each group compare to the national average? What are some ways schools prepare young people for different futures? College prep classes and vocational training. College prep classes gear you to go on to college and become some kind of a white-collar professional, whether it be a teacher or a lawyer or a businessman, where vocational training trains you to be a skilled worker, and it could be welding or plumbing, electrical, or something like that, cosmetology, all those kinds of things. The student-teacher interaction. Students are labeled fast learners and slow learners without any data, eventually took on the characteristics of the label. There is a self-fulfilling prophecy and a prediction that leads to behavior that makes the prediction come true. When teachers treat students as if they are bright and capable, the students begin to think of themselves in this way, and then vice versa. There's a research study in which the students they took two groups of students, and the teacher, one class, they were identical classes. They told one teacher that these students were upper level, high achieving, academically gifted students, and the other teacher was told that these were ordinary kids that would struggle to learn. And what they found was that these teachers, the teachers that thought they were teaching academically gifted students, pressed these students harder and challenged them more and got higher results than the teachers who had the other students. And there was nothing different about either class. They were identical classes. Interactions among students. The Coleman report found that socioeconomic status of fellow students was the most significant factor in explaining student success. Peer pressure may be a factor in this dynamic. And so students of upper classes did not hang out with students of the lower classes, and as a result. And so much of that might be related. The self-fulfilling prophecy. Students tend to accept the label that teachers place on them and behave accordingly. The student's behavior thus confirms the teacher's original expectations. How might a sociologist use the self-fulfilling prophecy to illustrate the conflict perspective of education? You have teacher expectation. Teacher communicates these expectations in praise and criticism to the student. Student performance is affected, and either the student performs worse than expected, and the student accepts the label of a low achiever, or the student will perform better than expected, and the student will accept that level of a higher achiever and change their status and view of themselves. Why are the interactionist sociologists interested in the self-fulfilling prophecy? Because they think this face-to-face learning is the most important. So a teacher's view of the student is one of the most influential things that a student learns. And in fact, they have found that teachers are the number one factor in the success of a student in a classroom. Functionalist perspective, education maintains social stability by transmitting culture on teaching knowledge and skills and preparing individuals for work. Our perspective, the conflict perspective, is the education perpetuates a social system that limits the potential of certain individuals and groups to gain social rewards and power. And then the interactionist perspective is the face-to-face interactions between students and teachers profoundly affect student educational achievement. Americans have tried to reform education in order to achieve broad, important social goals. This is section 2. We'll discuss the issues in education. Alternatives to traditional public system schools include private and charter schools, school choice, and homeschooling. Violence in schools is a serious social concern. Methods and curricula for teaching English to non-native speakers are highly controversial. Our main idea for this section is that Americans devote much of their attention and money to education because they want education to remedy social problems. So what you should be able to answer by the end of this section is, what are some of the key conflicts in educational reform? What alternatives are there to traditional public schools? How have schools tried to prevent violence? And what options have been proposed for teaching English as a second language? So let's talk about the history of reform in education. In the early part of the 1900s, education's concerns centered around the assimilation of immigrants. At this point in history, we had large numbers of people immigrating to the United States from Eastern and Southern Europe. And these people were coming in as a result, and they were culturally quite different from the American immigrants that we had had in the past, which were mostly Northern and Western Europeans, which tended to be Protestant. In the mid-1900s, Americans looked to education to win the space race. So in the mid-1900s, the 1950s and 60s and 70s, the space program became very important. We emphasized students going to school for things like engineering and in order for us to be able to plan for space travel and to get the first man on the moon. And this was a big thing at the point where I was growing up in the 1960s. And in fact, they used to, back in those days, they only had one television. They would roll that television into our classroom, and we would get to watch it at any time they were launching a rocket into space. After 1983, however, education focused on comparing American students to those in other nations. This was during Ronald Reagan's administration, and it became a big thing between the competition with Asia and the United States, because the Japanese were overtaking the American auto industry, and much of American industry was beginning to move overseas to places like China and India, or not China, Japan and India, and Korea. Although many overhauls occurred, reforms brought little progress. So they've done a whole lot during the 80s and 90s to try to change education, and they're still trying many different things to this day, but very little change has taken place. The important goals originally planned for 2000 were not met. In 2000, the President of the United States was a guy named George W. Bush, and George came up with a program called the No Child Left Behind program, and this changed many of the situations that the way that schools were approached their reforms. Excuse me. 2001, the law with benchmarks for improving school was known as No Child Left Behind. It provided money for schools to improve teaching. It made standardized testing a driving force in education, and it measured how a school was performing. Extra emphasis on early reading and instruction and teacher preparation was given, and although test scores have risen, some claim that higher order thinking skills and critical thinking skills have been neglected in order to be able to score well on tests. And so as a result of that, No Child Left Behind has created a lot of conflict. One of the big issues today now is the battle over standardized testing. What have been purposes behind education reform since the 1980s? Improve student achievement, preparation for jobs in the age of information technology. The drive for students to perform well on standardized tests have ended to the loss of a lot of extracurricular type activities like art and science and music programs. Well, not so much science, but the art and music and physical education and dance, things like that. Also, it was in that time where a lot of elementary schools eliminated the practice of having recess, because that was seen as unproductive time that could be used for educating children. Technology focus, our schools without walls. The increasing use of technology is changing how we view the classroom. This presentation is an example of that. Students in different locations can participate in a course run by the teacher using podcasts, shared electronic whiteboards, message boards, real-time audio, video chats. Small rural schools have been using these methods for many years to share courses with each other and allow them to expand their offerings. But there are further advantages. Technology, like that which enabled engineers in California to control a vehicle on the surface of Mars, now enables a middle school student in Virginia to control a camera mounted on an undersea vehicle deep in the Pacific Ocean. Simultaneously, he or she can converse with a scientist in Scotland while students all over the world watch and listen. A student so what we want to do is infer what questions might an interactionist sociologist ask about the effects of modern technology on the process of education. Charter schools, funded with public money but are privately operated and run. The charter establishes the amount of public funding the school will receive. Okay, and oftentimes charter schools are not held to the same standards as public schools. And this is where much part of the conflict comes in. School choice. School parents may receive a voucher equal to the amount their state spends on education for their child that they can put toward tuition at a private, charter, or a religious school. North Carolina provides school choice by providing vouchers for students to be able to go to private, charter, or charter schools. Homeschooling, a system in which a child's main education is undertaken by parents at home. Critics of homeschooling claim that it may not provide a broad enough curriculum or necessary social interaction, meaning that what the concern is that if you get all your education at home, you don't get a diversity of ideas, and you don't meet other children, and it interferes with your social skills. So what alternatives to traditional public schools have been proposed? Charter, contract, private, and religious schools. Vouchers and homeschooling are other ways of achieving these things. So now let's talk about violence in schools. A 2006 survey showed that 75% of parents believed their public schools were very or somewhat safe. Such fears are generated by violent incidents such as the Columbine High School shootings or Parkland shooting in more recent times. In 2005, about 10% of boys and 3% of girls were threatened or injured by a weapon at school. Schools seem to be safer for students than being off campus, however. Schools have developed zero-tolerance policies that involve set punishments, often expulsion and no leniency for serious offenses such as carrying a weapon, committing a violent act, or possessing drugs or alcohol. These zero-tolerance programs really came out in a big way after the Columbine shootings because it was such a tragic event. Some educators believe that the best way to curb school violence is to teach young people how to resolve disputes peacefully rather than violently, which is what some children resort to. So, statistically, making schools safe. School safety has become a major concern for students, their parents, and teachers. As a result, administrators have taken steps to make schools safer. 14% of students in grades 9 through 12 who have been involved in a physical fight at school. 28% of students who have experienced verbal or physical bullying at school in the last 6 months. And that's why there's such a stress on bullying nowadays. 86% of high schools in which theft was reported in the school year 2005-2006, 85% of public schools that control access to their school buildings, and that's why we have the card readers on the front of the school and where the cameras where somebody has to buzz you in. 43% of public schools that use security cameras, and as you're aware, there are security cameras all over the school. And then 2% of public schools that require students to pass through metal detectors on a daily basis. And so far, we have yet to get to that level. So what is the most prevalent security measure used in public schools? So what solutions to school violence have been proposed? Zero tolerance policies, restrict access to school buildings, training, and conflict resolution. Now, let's talk about English as a second language. There's bilingual education, a system in which non-English speaking students study science, math, and other subjects in their native languages until they gain fluency in English. Bilingual education has had the support of many educators, but the plan has been opposed by those who believe that it interferes with cultural assimilation. In 1998, a citizens' initiative made bilingual education illegal in California. As of 2008, 30 states have laws making English their officially recognized language. Why are bilingual education programs so controversial? Because opponents think that bilingual education programs slow assimilation. Alternative education. Interest in alternative schooling methods has led to three distinctive styles of alternative schooling: the free school movement, the magnet school, and the back to basics curricula. Free schools should encourage creativity by allowing students to learn through exploration and experimentation. The magnet school, with distinct features, tended to attract students from across a district, like Enloe, where we're a gifted and talented school, and as a result. Back to basics curricula programs are designed to prepare failing or at-risk students for their return to the mainstream schooling. So what these schools do is help kids who are behind get up to basic level. First two types are designed as a way to change schooling. The third type is designed as a substitute. Some longtime supporters are concerned that this third style has become the dominant form of schooling. So what three movements in alternative schooling developed in the 60s and 70s? Do you think alternative education is defined by Robert Fizell is needed in the United States? So, section 3, let's talk about religion. Religion is always a sensitive topic when we discuss it in school. A religion is a system of rules and norms organized around the sacred, which binds people together in groups. Religions can provide social cohesion, social control, and emotional support. Religions are characterized by their rituals, their symbols, their beliefs, and their organizational structures. So the main idea of this section, religion is a socially created set of practices that embody and define a group's idea about the sacred. So what you should be able to answer at the end of this section is, what is the sociological definition of religion? What are the functions of religion? And how do sociologists analyze the nature of religion? A sociological definition of religion: societies have struggled with the need to give meaning to human existence and to provide people with the motivation of survival. Societies make distinctions between the sacred anything is considered to be part of the supernatural world and inspires awe, respect, and reverence. And the profane, anything considered to be part of the ordinary world and thus commonplace and familiar. This distinction is the basis of all religions, systems of roles and norms that are organized around the sacred realm and that bind people together in social groups. Religion is a basic institution, yet it exists in many different forms because different societies give sacred meaning to a wide variety of objects, events, and experiences. Belief in a particular religion is based on faith rather than on science. So what are the essential features of religion? Distinction between the sacred and the profane, and the focus on the supernatural world. Social cohesion. Religion strengthens the bonds between people. And it can lead to conflict between adherents of different religions. As we saw when we studied psychology, that people with a religious system tend to be happier and live longer than people without. They also, however, differing ways of worshiping tend to cause conflicts between people, as we've seen throughout history, particularly between Christians and Muslims. As an example. Religion also exhibits a form of social control. It encourages people to conform to the norms. Things like the Ten Commandments dictate how we will behave. It provides a divine purpose for the conformity. It's not because, of us, it's because God wants it. That kind of thing. It may inhibit innovation, freedom of thought, and social reform. And we saw this in the medieval period, where people like and during the Renaissance, where people like Galileo and Copernicus were not able to give out their ideas because their ideas ran contrary to what the church was teaching at that time in history. And then, of course, Martin Luther came along and created a major social reform as a result of that. Emotional support. Religion provides us with emotional support, and it helps people endure disappointment and suffering by providing a comfort and believing that the harsh circumstances have a special purpose. It attempts to provide answers to the questions concerning life and death. And so, as I mentioned before, religion has been proven to make people happier because it gives them a sense of community, and in times of crisis, they have something to fall back on that is more than just their own personal will. So the function of religion, from the functionalist perspective, religion promotes social stability by integrating society, serving as an agent of social control, and offering emotional support. How do conflict theorists view these functions of religion? Social cohesion. Religion encourages the strengthening of bonds among people participating in religious ceremonies such as the Hajj, a pilgrimage to Mecca, which strengthens Muslims' bonds to the wider Islamic world. Social control. Religion encourages conformity to the norms and values of society. For example, their simple uniforms or robes remind Buddhist monks that they must replace individual desire with total dedication to the faith. And emotional support. Religion often provides comfort in times of personal suffering or natural disaster. The support of clergy may lend strength to confronting difficult times, like with the death of a spouse, for instance. Summarize, what basic human needs does religion serve? Social cohesion, social control, and emotional support. So this is the purpose of religion from a sociological perspective. The nature of religion, what makes religion act the way it does, ritual and established pattern of behavior through which a group of believers experience the sacred. The rituals of going to church and taking communion or doing your prayers at a particular time during each day and in a particular way. This ritual can often make a huge difference. Ritual is often used to mark changes in status, birth, as in baptism, marriage, death, and catechism or bar mitzvah, things like that. They provide you with these religious rituals at different stages of your life. It also unites the believers and helps them reinforce faith by bringing them together. They can share in the faith and exhibit different ways the way that they worship together, and bonding and creating a stronger community as a result. It often includes sacred symbolic objects such as clothing or herbs and chalices or books, incense, different things like that. Belief systems. There are different types of belief systems. Animism is the belief in spirits actively influence human life. There are two kinds, shamanism and totemism. And you would see these, you see this much in the Polynesian world, or in the Native Americans, we're familiar with them, or in Africa, we saw many religions based on animism. Theism is the belief in God or gods, and two kinds of monotheism. There's polytheism and monotheism. Monotheism, of course, meaning the belief in one God, who's usually seen as the creator and moral authority of all that there is. And in polytheism, a belief in a number of gods, sort of like the ancient Greeks and the Romans, who had many different gods that represented different parts of the world. And then there's ethicalism, the idea that there's moral principles have a sacred quality. And so the concepts, ethicalism would be the religions more like Buddhism and Confucianism that exist as a result here. Organizational structures. Ecclesia, structured bureaucratic organization, are closely allied with the government, whose officials are highly trained and wield considerable power. And this was, if we think of how the Catholic Church operated in medieval Europe, it had a strong power and influence over all the governments of Europe. The denomination is a well-established religious organization in which a substantial number of the population are members. And so we have major denominations within the United States, like the Catholic Church or the Methodist Church, the Episcopal Church, etc. And these are the major denominations. In the United States, the prominent denomination are Protestant denominations that exist. We also have sects, relatively small religious organizations that typically has split off from the denomination because of differences in concerning beliefs. Ever since Martin Luther, we've had many sects break off within Christianity. The Baptist Church has many sects within it. There are lots of different types of Baptist Church, for instance. Then you have cults. Cults are new religions whose beliefs differ markedly from those of the society's major religions, and oftentimes are quite different. And so you see these cults oftentimes are led by charismatic leaders, like within our society. So our acceptance of religious organizations in Western society can be ranked according to how well they are accepted and integrated within the society. The ecclesia are the most accepted denominations, sects, and then the cults, of course, are the least accepted. So what are the four basic elements of all religions? Rituals, symbols, belief system, and organizational structure. Section 4, religion in the American society. A vast majority of Americans believe in God. The United States, believe it or not, is considered one of the most religious countries in the world. It's just that we have many different religions instead of one main religion. American religions are organized into more than 400 denominations. About half Americans consider themselves religious, and are considered religious teachings when making decisions. Americans' religious beliefs and practices vary along several dimensions. So, at the end of this section, you should be able to answer, what are the main religions in the United States? How many Americans participate in religion? And how fundamentalist Christianity is important in the American society. Freedom of religion is protected by law and supported by popular opinion. Freedom of religion is part of the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. The United States is the home of hundreds of religious denominations, sects, and even cults. Immigrants often bring new religions to the United States. The general opinion in the U.S. is that all people should hold some religious belief. The separation of church and state means that the U.S. has no national religion, and the founding fathers of the United States believed very firmly that there should be no single religion. The rise of fundamentalist Christianity, however, has become a topic of study. Most Americans belong to one of the major faiths, with the majority being Protestant Christians, meaning that they are part of the faiths of Christianity that have split off since the time of Martin Luther. Demographic differences among the religious groups, however, do exist. Religion in the United States. Religious affiliation has a strong regional basis. Baptists tend to dominate the South, while Methodists are strong throughout the Midwest. Lutherans are found mostly in the upper Midwest, and Catholics are numerous in the Northeast and Southwest. So why do you think Catholicism is the dominant religion in much of the southwestern portion of the United States, down in here? So describe the Americans' religious affiliations. Most Americans belong to the major faiths. The major faiths of the world are Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. They're not to say that there aren't other faiths, but these are what the majority of Americans follow, one of these three major religions. Religious participation. Although the majority of Americans claim a religious preference, only about 1/3 of people attend religious services on a regular basis. Religiosity is the depth of people's religious feelings. It's hard to measure. The depth and feeling does not correlate with participation in services. The secular. It refers to non-religious aspects of society, decisions based equally on religious teachings and on their own beliefs. So why do some sociologists claim the United States is becoming more secular? Religion is losing its influence on everyday life. Now, let's talk about fundamentalist Christianity. Religious fundamentalism refers to a set of associated beliefs, including strict adherence to religion's rules and practices, and the belief that religion should be the primary force in one's life. A variety of fundamentalist Christian groups exist in the United States, but they share the beliefs that the Christian Bible is completely and literally true, that Jesus Christ is divine, their faith will bring personal salvation, the born-again experience, and they are obligated to bring Jesus Christ into the lives of non-believers. So they're evangelistic. 26% of Americans describe themselves as born again or evangelical Christians. These Americans have become politically organized around certain issues such as opposition to abortion, opposition to homosexuality, transgender rights, or gay marriage. So what are the main beliefs of the fundamentalist Christians? The Christian Bible is literally and completely true. These are the people that think the earth is only 5,000 years old. This is the one true religion. Their faith will bring about personal salvation, the born-again experience. They are obligated to bring Jesus into the lives of non-believers so that they can experience divinity. Since colonial times, people have come to the United States to enjoy the freedom of worship and how they please. Modern immigrants have helped transform the United States into the most religiously diverse country in the world. The famous pilgrims came here from England to escape a religious persecution in England because they were worshiping the Church of England in a way that was much more conservative than what the church directed. And so they came to the United States for this freedom. Christianity's first Protestants arrived in the 1600s, and the country is today predominantly Christian. And these people settled largely in the northeastern portion of the United States. Buddhism was brought here by Chinese immigrants, and during the mid-1800s when Chinese workers came over to work on the railroads and mining and things like that. Many non-Asian Americans have adopted it, particularly after the conquest of Tibet. Many of the Tibetan monks escaped to India and then came to the United States to help and have spread many of those ideas. During the 1960s, many of the college generation of the 1960s adopted the ideas of Buddhism because it was different and was mind-opening. Hinduism is born in the ancient Indus Valley and is considered to be the world's oldest religion. And today there are more than 1 million Hindus in the United States. So Hinduism is a fast-growing religion in the United States, as is Islam. Judaism is probably the world's second oldest religion, and it was founded some 2000 BC and practiced by about 5 million Americans, a number actually larger than the population of Israel are Jewish here in the United States. Islam is the religion of Muslims, and there are more than 4.7 million Muslims in the United States. Here again, Islam is a fast-growing religion within the United States, and even though there's a great deal of persecution resulting from the wars of the 21st century. Other religions that exist in the United States are Sikhism, Baha'i, Taoism, spiritualism. There's diverse Native American religions. There are New Age faiths such as Scientology and etc. There are 34 million people that claim no religion at all, and more than 1 million people claim to be atheist. So what effect has immigration had on the religious diversity in the United States? And in what ways do religious diversity in the United States affect society? All right, so for our lab, what we're going to do, we're going to look at how one society dealt with a calamity. You're going to investigate how the Amish religious beliefs shaped their norms and guide their behavior. As you know, the Amish are a very conservative religious sect that we find here in the United States and Canada. In this lab, you'll investigate how the Amish adjust their education to accommodate their relations with the larger society. You're going to read the case study and work in a group on the assigned activity. So what you're going to is read this article. Nickel Mines of Pennsylvania is predominantly Amish and pacifist religious community that practices a simple farming life without modern convenience, much the same as their 17th century Swiss-German forebears did. On October 2nd, 2006, a non-Amish resident of a nearby town went to the one-room Amish school in nickel mines and shot 10 of the students before killing himself. The modern media world descended en masse on the tiny community, and what they found astounded many. Coming from the community was not revenge or anger, but gentle, heartfelt insistence on forgiveness for the shooter, his widow, and his children. The widow was invited to the funeral of one of the victims. Half of the 75 attendees at the killer's funeral were Amish and included parents of the victims. The gestures of love and forgiveness included hugs and condolences from the victim's family, as well as an offer to let the widow and her family live in the Amish community. Within a week of the tragedy, the Amish had set up 2 funds to help the surviving families. One of the families of the girls and one of the children of the shooter. Herman Bottrenger, a spokesperson for the Amish, explained, "The Amish believe that we must forgive because we ourselves need to be forgiven." This would be a devastatingly difficult event for any community, but perhaps especially for one in which, according to CNN, there's no crime. Yet it is not as though the Amish are ignoring their inner feelings and hurts. The old school has been torn down, and 1 year after the incident, the Amish were still dealing with the pain. The local Family Resource and Counseling Center has provided therapy for adults and children of the community. The center's founder, Jonas Beeler, grew up and was married in nickel mines and knows his own grief. Some years ago, his and his wife Ann's infant daughter was killed, Jonas says. We've talked to these people, and they're all dealing with this one day at a time, the best they can. They're all still nightmares. A year after the nickel mine school shooting, members of the Amish community comfort each other at a memorial service. An official statement said, "Forgiveness is a journey. You need help from the community of faith to make and hold on to the decision and not become a hostage of hostility." So your group activity. Address the topics that are assigned. Answer the questions that are listed with each topic. What did you learn from this lab? As a group, discuss the following. What are the findings of each group? How did you come to a shared opinion? And what did group members disagree about? This concludes Chapter 14, Education and Religion. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I look forward to seeing your responses.